all sorts of insurgencies all over the world, 50s and 60s. We had them in Africa. It was Mau Mau time. It was the time of Second Chimurenga. It was the time of fight for political liberation in West Africa. It was the time of les événements de 18, of 68, sorry, of what they call the events of 68, when students revolted in France and brought down the Fourth French Republic, Charles de Gaulle. It was a time of revolutions and protests in the United States, civil rights, anti-war movement, the Black and Proud time, Let It All Hang Out time. So there was this global agitation against all these structures of oppressive power. And feminist movement rolled in the cocktail of civil rights movement. But what happened was, in 1970, the first women's studies program was established in the United States at the University of San Diego in California. Women started to write about the experiences they had protesting and demanding, a space in the society, demanding to be treated as full citizens. But when they started writing it, who wrote? There were white women, middle class, not even more, because they were educated, they were not poor white women. And what they wrote did not include the other women. Not because they are wicked people, it is they wrote their own experience. See, the white woman could not be writing about the experience of the Chicana woman. So it showed more their limitation than bad faith. But then, at that time, what we're talking about was sexual politics, women against men. But in the 80s, that whole scholarship, that whole agenda exploded before their eyes. There was an internal insurrection in the movement, in the scholarship, because other women started demanding to see their faces, to see their experiences in that scholarship. That was the emergence of the women of color feminism. Black women, Chicana women, American Indian women, Asian women, all sorts of women. So now, what it did was it forced feminist scholarship to expand its horizon. It was good. Then, in the 90s came African women. We still were looking, all these women, even black women who are from the North, Europe, America, they can be as imperialistic as their white sisters and can be as patronizing with their maternalistic attitude to African women. So we decided that we also have to have our voices, and we have to include what they didn't include, issues of imperialism. It wasn't there. And that's what I started this lecture with. So they didn't have that type of experience we had, cultural issues. So that was how African feminism came into being. Of course, in the process, there was the womanism, which also the Alice Walker brand tried to modulate. It showed more the power of the woman, more than the agitation, a cultural. Because in African American culture, when they said you're acting, a girl is acting, they said, stop acting womanish. Womanish, meaning, that's because, they have this issue of black matriarchy, powerful. Don't be, little girl, don't be acting womanish. That's how she got her womanism. So it's a powerful positioning. Then there was African womanism developed by African feminists that incorporated our thinking about the collaboration with men, the whole agenda about sharing space and all that. African feminism is not only reactive, it is proactive. It does not only say, I resist, therefore I am. It puts something in place that stands in opposition against what it resists. The contextualization and theorizing of African feminisms emerged in the 1990s in response to the exclusions and inadequacies of second-wave Western feminism and Western womanism. If the 1980s was the decade of the women of color feminisms, the 1990s constituted the decade of African feminisms. Just as the women of color movement compelled Western feminist thinking and theorizing to liberate itself from the myopia of gender specificity, to broaden and intensify its context and texture by allowing other categories such as race and class to intersect with gender. African feminism made further demands on feminism to expand its analytical horizon by incorporating other considerations as culture, colonialism, ethnicity, and imperialism, and in particular, examining the ways in which these considerations intersect to construct and reproduce gender. The disagreement between two schools of thought. On the one hand, those insisting that feminism is foreign to African continent, and on the other hand, those affirming that feminism is indigenous to African. We cannot, it's an English word, feminism, but the ideal, the spirit, that spirit of women asserting themselves, that spirit of women claiming space, that feeling of women demanding that they should be treated fairly is indigenous to our culture. In fact, it has been one of my very discomforting type of zone when I with Western feminism. As an African woman, I had not really even now reconciled with this push for equality. As an African woman, and coming from this culture, I believe that what women keep demanding is equity, fairness, justice. Don't take me for a ride. Don't mistreat me. There is no way two people can be equal. So I feel it's a word that alienates instead of helping to create understanding about what we want to do. So in that sense, women have fought that type of fight in Africa. So we cannot say this is a foreign thing. So we're not talking about radical feminism and all this stuff from, no. The spirit, I'm talking of the spirit of feminism, is very indigenous to Africa. African feminisms share certain features that mark their difference. I want to compare a little from Western feminisms. I use plural for both, actually. African feminism is not as exclusionary in terms of articulation and gender participation as Western feminism appears to be. In its articulation, African feminism is suffused with the language of compromise, collaboration, and negotiation. In its practice, it invites men as partners in social change. Motherhood and maternal politics are not marginalized in African feminism. Women have led protests and revolution because of what? My children. So we cannot say, oh, because they're mothers. They're injecting this mother thing, this subjectivity, so we know it's not feminist. That's the way they see their feminism. African feminism is proactive, marks its specificities, and maps priorities that often go beyond the intersection of race, class, and gender to include the consequences of colonialism and its aftermath. By locating African feminism solely as an oppositional moment in the scheme of things, one risks undercutting its scope, import, and significance. African feminism's reason for being is not determined by its resistance to Western feminism. So when this African formulation of this and theorizing emerged in the 90s, I will give you a few instances before I come to my take on the whole process. Chikwenye Ogunyemi from Nigeria, she came up with womanism instead of feminism, a concept that she argued was more appropriate than feminism to describe African women's engagement in social transformation. Ogunyemi's womanism, which morphed into African womanism in later writings, claims affinity with feminism, but asserts its difference by expanding the boundaries of feminism to incorporate racial, cultural, national, economic, and political consideration. African womanism insists that the gender question must be reimagined in light of other issues that are relevant to African women in local, national, and global contexts. Catherine, another one, Achalono, she proposed motherism as an Afrocentric alternative to feminism. Achalono's motherism places motherhood, nature, nurture, and respect for the environment at the center of feminist theorizing, almost like cultural and ecofeminism. In 1994, can you flip the other one? Let's see. Oh yeah, you have that. No. Okay, that's the one you had before. Yes, good. No, this one. Yes. Katrina Chilon. Then the next one was Molara Ogundibe. She came up with Stiwanism. Stiwa means it's an acronym for social transformation, including women in Africa. At the end of the decade, Obioma Nnaemeka proposed another alternative, negofeminism, feminism of negotiation, or no-ego feminism, which captures central concerns in many African cultures. Ideas like negotiation, give and take, complementarity, collaboration. Armed with the knowledge of the African worldview, as inscribed in the proverb, and enriched by many years of collaboration with Africa-based scholars and activists in development processes and social movements, Obioma Nnaemeka formulated an African feminist theoretical framework, negofeminism, that is built on the indigenous, what I mentioned about Claude Ake, I borrowed this idea from, using the pervasive space sharing and collaboration inscribed in African proverbs. Space sharing, at least in Igbo culture and Igbo proverbs, there are all these, the idea to share space. We say, Ewe bello, ugo bello, nke kwere ko bello, unkukwanya. Let the vulture perch and let the eagle perch. And whichever one says the other one is not gonna perch, let his wings fall off. Do and let, live and let live. It's inscribed in culture. You negotiate, you claim, you share space. This whole individualistic idea about my way or the highway, This individual of zero-sum game is the antithesis of what we have. The diversity of the African continent notwithstanding, I know nobody should always say African this, African that, as if Africa is one little village. We have immense diversity. But one thing is, if you go through African cultures, there are some underlying ways of looking at things that really cuts across so many of African cultures. They are not the same, but it seems that they have some unifying spirits in them. Nego-feminism, the feminism of negotiation, had gained currency in feminist theorizing. Here, negotiation has a double meaning. It has a double meaning of exchange, give and take, but it also has the meaning of go around. I'm negotiating a corner. So, in that sense, negotiation has a double meaning. African feminism, feminism of negotiation, feminism that avoids and takes the other, get where you're going, but you have to really change course. It knows when, where, and how to detonate patriarchal landmines. It also knows when, where, and how to go around patriarchal landmines. In other words, it knows when, where, and how to negotiate with or negotiate around patriarchy in different contexts. African women's willingness and readiness to negotiate with and around men, even in difficult circumstances, is quite pervasive. As the Cameroonian writer Calice Bayala puts it at the beginning of one of her books, she says, "Soyons clairs, tous les hommes ne sont pas des salauds." Let's face it, all men are not bastards. I take that to mean that some men are bastards. But let's stick to Bayala's more benevolent phrasing of the issue. Another example is also a Francophone woman writer, Mariam Abba of Senegal, who dedicated her fine novel, Si longue lettre, So Long a Letter, to many constituencies, including les hommes de bonne volonté, men of goodwill, and of course, she doesn't want the bad will one. So they make distinction. They just put this cloak over all men and try to produce a monolith. To speak of feminism in Africa is to speak of feminisms in the plural, and that's why I have it there. As my ancestors said, Adiro, Afo, Foebe, and Enamon, if you don't stand in a place to look at a masquerade, different perspectives, like the dancing masquerade, vantage points shift, and one must shift with them to maximize benefits. I look at what African feminism in a nutshell. First, African feminism raises an oppositional voice against radical feminism. African feminism is not radical Western feminism. Second, African feminism resists radical feminism's stridency against motherhood. Maternal politics is feminist politics for African women. Then, the question of language. Language of feminist engagement in Africa, collaborate, negotiate, compromise, runs counter to the language of Western feminist scholarship and engagement. Some of you will read that: challenge, disrupt, deconstruct, blow apart. It's different. African feminism challenges through negotiation and compromise. Western feminism's inordinate and unrelenting emphasis on sexuality that determines, for example, the nature, tone, and spectacle, overall modus operandi of Western feminist insurgency against female circumcision in Africa and the Arab world, for example. African